Okay, good afternoon to all students. The previous two classes we discussed about the French Revolution. Last class we studied the third estate takes the leadership. Okay. Then after that we studied the impact of the French Revolution. Okay. Then in the timeline of the French Revolution we discussed that 1792. The middle class then form the National Convention. National Convention is the National Assembly. The middle class formed the National Assembly and they declared the France as the Republic, isn't it? That we discussed the previous classes. And after declaring the France as the Republic, then they formed the constitution of France in France in 1799, isn't it? They formed the one constitution of France in 1799. That constitution was bicameral legislature, isn't it? That constitution was the bicameral legislature. In the bicameral legislature, the executive wing was controlled by the directors, isn't it? In the bicameral legislature, there is two wings. The executive wing was controlled by the directors. That directory. In that directory, it was the 5 directors, isn't it? So after declaring the France as the Republic, then they formed the one constitution of France. Then that constitution was based on the bicameral system, bicameral setup. In the bicameral system, the executive wing was controlled by the directory. A directory in France, that directory, it was consist of the 5 directors. But unfortunately, they could not then function properly in France. At that time, then in 1817 directory was 1799. Directory was overthrown and Napoleon captured the power. Understood? 1799, the directory was overthrown and Napoleon captured the power. Thus, the Napoleon then became the first emperor in France. He declared himself the emperor of France in 1804. Who was Napoleon? Napoleon Bonaparte was the very important, efficient emperor of France. He was the France military general, officer in France. Napoleon Bonaparte was the French military general. He was the first emperor of France. Then after captured the directory, he declared himself. He was the first emperor of France. അപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ കണ്ടത് ഫ്രഞ്ച് റവല്യൂഷന് ശേഷം പിന്നെ അവിടെ ഭരിക്കുന്നത് they formed the one constitution of France, but that constitution could not function properly. At that time, 1799, then Napoleon came and overthrown the directory and captured the power of France, and he declared himself he was the first emperor of France. അപ്പോൾ ഫ്രാൻസിന് ഫ്രീഡം കിട്ടി കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ടും കുറച്ചു കാലം കൂടെ ഫ്രാൻസ് ആരുടെ കൂടെ ഫ്രാൻസിലെ ജനങ്ങൾ നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ കൂടെ, ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ദ എഫിഷ്യന്റ് എംപറർ, ഹി വാസ് ദ ഇമ്പീരിയലിസ്റ്റ് പവർ ആൻഡ് ഹി വാസ് ദ മൊണാർക്കിസ്റ്റ്. അവരുടെ കൂടെ ഫ്രാൻസിലെ ജനങ്ങൾക്ക് നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ കൂടെ ഭരിക്കേണ്ടതായിട്ട് വന്നു. ഓക്കെ. Then Napoleon Bonaparte was the very efficient imperialist power. Okay. Then his ambition was expanding the France and conquering the neighboring countries. And then which is the neighboring country? That is the England and Spain, and all these are the neighboring countries of the France. And his ambition was to establish united Europe under his control. Isn't it? His ambition was to unite France under his control. For fulfilling his ambition, he waged a series of war from 1799 to 1850. അപ്പോൾ നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ ആഗ്രഹം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ യൂറോപ്യൻ കൺട്രീസിനെ ഒരൊറ്റ രാജ്യമാക്കി ഭരിക്കുക ഫ്രാൻസിന്റെ കീഴിൽ. ദാറ്റ് വാസ് ദ ambition of the Napoleon. For fulfilling his ambition, he waged a series of war from 1799 to 1850, isn't it? But last 1815 Waterloo War, the Napoleon was defeated by the England and allied powers of Europe, and then ended the imperialist power of the France. Okay. Then all of you look at the screen. In France, under the control of the under the control of the Napoleon, in France, nationalism strengthened during the reign of Napoleon, isn't it? At the time of the reign, at the reign of the France, at the reign of the Napoleon, the nationalism strengthened. He invaded the other European countries. The European countries feared that the reforms of Napoleon would spread all over Europe. So listen here, at the time of Napoleon, the nationalism strengthened in France, one by one. What was his ambition? His ambition was united European countries under the France. Then that's why he invaded the European countries one by one. That is why the European countries feared that the reforms of Napoleon. They really afraid the reforms of Napoleon, and not the reforms of Napoleon, and not the Napoleon, and that they were afraid of, isn't it? The European countries afraid the reforms of Napoleon, or the ideologies of Napoleon, ideologies of French Revolution. What was the ideologies of French Revolution? Liberty, equality, and fraternity. They really afraid the reforms of Napoleon, and not for the Napoleon, isn't it? Napoleon അല്ല, നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ ഐഡിയോളജീനെ അവരാരും ഭയപ്പെട്ടു? European countries feared that the reforms of Napoleon would spread all over the Europe, isn't it? They feared the reforms of Napoleon may be spread all over the Europe. For preventing the reforms of Napoleon, they organized themselves under the leadership of England. It was the idea of French Revolution and not the Napoleon that they were afraid of. Napoleon was defeated by the European alliance in the Battle of Waterloo, and lost his power in 1815. At last, Napoleon was defeated at the Waterloo War in 1815. Napoleon was defeated. The war Waterloo 1815. The Waterloo War was destroyed the Napoleon imperialist power in France. Understood? അപ്പോൾ ലാസ്റ്റ് 1815 വാട്ടർലൂ യുദ്ധത്തിലെ ആര് തോറ്റുപോയി? നെപ്പോളിയൻ തോറ്റുപോയി, and destroyed the imperialist power in France, isn't it? Then anyway, then some years Napoleon was ruled in France, and he implemented some reforms in France, isn't it? And Napoleon ruled the France in some years, and at that time he was the very strong imperialist ruler, and he implemented several reforms for uplifting the people of the France. Then we can discuss the one by one. Farmers were made the owners of land. First point, farmers were made the owners of the land. Okay. We already know that the condition of the French society, then the farmers, the middle class was then the third estate of the French society. They led the very pathetic and very miserable life. So after getting the administration, then the Napoleon first implemented for saving the farmers of the France. Then what was first reforms? Then made the owners of the land. Then the Then the farmers, peasants were freed from the clutches of the landlords and made the owners of the land. The then the reforms of the Napoleon was that peasants were freed from the clutches of the landlords and made the owners of the land. അവരെന്നെ എന്താക്കി മാറ്റി? അവരെന്നെ land owners ആക്കിയിട്ട് മാറ്റി. They freed from the clutches of the landlords. They freed from the exploitation of the landlords, isn't it? The second point is that form the sinking fund with the aim to avoid the public debit, isn't it? The second reforms was that he formed the one fund. That fund was known as the sinking fund to avoid the public debt. The government can take the a loan from this then the sinking fund for avoiding the public debit. He formed the one fund. That fund was known as the sinking fund, isn't it? Then third reforms of the Napoleon was that constructed several roads for transportation. You already know that then the roads are helping for the development of the trade, commerce, and transportation. The development of the country is influencing the good road, isn't it? And so then the Napoleon constructed the roads for the transportation. That roads were held for the goods trade, commerce, and other economic development of the country. Okay. Fourth point is that exercise state control over the clergy, isn't it? The very important reforms of Napoleon was that control over the clergy. Who was clergy? Clergy was then the first estate of the French society. Clergy was the priest. They are enjoying all privileges in the society, isn't it? That already we discussed in the first class, French Revolution first class, about the French society. So the Napoleon control over the clergy. Clergy here, clergy means that they are the priests. They were the priests, and they were the first estate of the French society, and the Catholic Church was brought under the control of the state. And so, along with the control over the clergy, the Napoleon control, and then the Catholic Church also brought then the brought control under then the brought under the control of the state. Catholic Church also was brought under the control of the state. Okay. Fourth point is that they established the Bank of established the Bank of Finance to centralize a Bank of France to centralize then the finance. Listen, establish the Bank of France to centralize finance. Then fourth point is that Napoleon established the Bank of France to centralize the finance. For maintaining the stability of the economics, the Napoleon reformed the Bank of France to centralize finance, isn't it? The last is that prepared the new code of law by codifying the existing laws, and Napoleon reformed the code of law. Napoleon, the Code of Napoleon was the very greatest contribution to the contribution of the emperor. The Code of Napoleon was the greatest contribution of the emperor. Napoleon codified the existing laws like the Justinian Code of Law. Napoleon, then the medieval period, Justinian Code of Law, law pole thanne, Justinian Code of Law pole thanne. Here, the Napoleon also form the existing code of law for the people of the France. That was the very important reforms of Napoleon. All of you look at the screen. First one, farmers were made the owners of land, isn't it? Form the sinking fund with the aim to avoid the public debit. Constructed several roads for transportation. He constructed several roads for transportation. Then exercised straight control over the clergy. Clergy was the priest, and that clergy was the first estate of the French society. And Napoleon control over the clergy. The Catholic Church was brought under the control of the state. Appa Catholic Church in a full Catholic Church in administration ആരുടെ കൺട്രോളിൽ കൊണ്ടുവന്നു? നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ കൺട്രോളിലേക്ക് കൊണ്ടുവന്ന് എന്ത് ചെയ്തു? ക്ലർജീനെ കൺട്രോൾ ചെയ്തു. Understand? Exercise state control over the clergy. That means that the Catholic Church was brought under the control of the state. Okay. Establish the Bank of France to centralize finance. In order to stabilize the finance of the country, the Bank of France was founded. For stabilizing the economy of the country, he established the Bank of France. Okay. Then last, prepared a new code of law by codifying the existing laws. He prepared the code of law by codifying the existing laws. The code of Napoleon was the greatest contribution of the emperor, isn't it? The code of Napoleon was the greatest contribution of the emperor. Okay, then that was the very important reforms of Napoleon. And then last, the Napoleon, the European the European countries, then the defeated Napoleon, the War of Waterloo 1815. അപ്പോൾ എന്ത് തന്നെയാണെങ്കിലും Napoleon ruled the France 1799 to 1815. All these years, France was under the control of the Napoleon. At last 1815, then the European Union, especially Britain, under the leadership of Britain, they defeated the Napoleon. Then the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Thus, the Napoleon imperialist power in France was destroyed. അപ്പോൾ ഫ്രാൻസിലെ ഫ്രഞ്ച് റവല്യൂഷൻ പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവുന്നത് ഒരു കാര്യം, then in France, the people, the aim of the French Revolution to rebuild the France at the ideology of the liberty, equality and fraternity. അതിന്റെ ബേസിൽ ഫ്രാൻസിനെ റീബിൽഡ് ചെയ്തു. പക്ഷേങ്കിൽ after the French Revolution, then the France became the republic and constitution was framed in France, but it was could not successful. That executive wing could not function properly. That is why then the Napoleon, the French military general, then came and captured and overthrown the directory, and he ruled the France in all these years 1799 to 1815. That was the small history of the French Revolution and Napoleon. അപ്പോൾ French Revolution പറ്റി പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ Napoleon Bonaparte was a very important then the section, and in the annual questions exam time, and then every time then there is some questions are very important from this topic. Very important question is that the reforms of Napoleon, what was the then the result of the impact of the French Revolution. That two question very important. Very important question was that what was the conditions of the French estate, first, second and third estate. Okay, then we completed the very vast topic French Revolution. Then I hope that you all are understood the French Revolution. Okay, then at the time of the France, at the time of the Napoleon, the French people in France, the nationalism then reached at the very high level, isn't it? അപ്പോൾ നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ സമയത്ത് നാഷണലിസം അതിന്റെ ഹൈ ലെവലിലേക്ക് എത്തി. യൂറോപ്യൻ കൺട്രീസ് ഫിയർഡ് ദ ഐഡിയോളജീസ് ഓഫ് നെപ്പോളിയൻ. നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ ഐഡിയോളജീസിനെയാണ് ആര് ഭയപ്പെട്ടത്? യൂറോപ്യൻ കൺട്രീസ്, നോട്ട് ഫോർ ദ നെപ്പോളിയൻ. അപ്പൊ നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ ഐഡിയോളജി, ദാറ്റ് നെപ്പോളിയൻ ഐഡിയോളജി ഹെൽപ്സ് ദ ഫ്രാൻസ് ബിക്കേം വെരി സ്ട്രോങ് ആൻഡ് ബിഗ് കൺട്രീസ് എമംഗ് ദ യൂറോപ്യൻ. അപ്പൊ നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ ആ ഐഡിയോളജി അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഫ്രഞ്ച് റവല്യൂഷന്റെ ആ എയിമാണ് ഫ്രാൻസിനെ അതിന്റെ ഏറ്റവും ഉയരങ്ങളിലേക്ക് എത്തിച്ചത്. അണ്ടർസ്റ്റുഡ്? അപ്പോൾ ഫ്രാൻസിന് നെപ്പോളിയനെ അല്ല, ഫ്രാൻസിന്റെ ആ ഐഡിയോളജി, നെപ്പോളിയന്റെ ഐഡിയോളജി. യൂറോപ്യൻ കൺട്രീസ് എല്ലാ കൺട്രീസും ദ ഫിയർഡ് ഓഫ് ഐഡിയോളജീസ് ഓഫ് നെപ്പോളിയൻ ആൻഡ് നോട്ട് ഫോർ ദ നെപ്പോളിയൻ. എനിവേ അറ്റ് ലാസ്റ്റ് ദ യൂറോപ്യൻ കൺട്രീസ് ഡിഫീറ്റഡ് ദ നെപ്പോളിയൻ at the Waterloo War 1815, and the imperialist power of Napoleon was destroyed. Understand? Okay, very important topic we finish. Okay, thank you. Then the We completed the then the first topic, American War of Independence, and the second topic is the French Revolution. All these topics are influence the world later revolution, and these revolutions are encouraging the then the other revolution, the people of other revolution, for starting the revolution against the imperialist power and the monarchical power. Okay, then the two big topic we completed. The tomorrow then we shall start the new other revolution, Latin America. Okay, I conclude my class. Okay, thank you.